The video opens on a cold, wind-bitten night. Snow falls in slow, soft flakes, but the mood is anything but gentle. Outside a modest suburban home, a young woman stands on the front step in a thin nightgown, arms wrapped around herself. Her breath puffs white into the air. She is small against the dark, and the light from the porch spills a weak circle around her feet. Her face is wet with more than cold. There are tracks of fresh tears down her cheeks. A voice from inside the house cuts through the quiet, sharp and raw. "Get out. Go to your family," it roars. The words are not shouted once and gone. They hang in the night like an accusation. She presses her palm against the glass of the closed door, as if the barrier might still be part of her life. The door stays shut. The lock clicks. The sound is final. The camera closes in on her face. Her eyes are wide with a mix of shock and disbelief. She had not expected this. This was supposed to be a night like any other, an argument, maybe, but not this. The narrator, in a calm third-person voice, asks quietly, "How did it come to this?" That question is the hook. Viewers want to know what led a person to be pushed out into a winter night like a stranger at the door. Flashback threads begin to appear. In short, clear beats. The couple had fought that evening over small things that seemed to pile up. Unpaid bills. Two people tired from different parts of the same day. Sharp words thrown like pebbles. The fight should have ended with apologies, or at least quiet. Instead, a line was crossed. The husband's voice changed from tired to cruel. He said things with a sharpness that cut through the usual friction. When she tried to speak, he only grew angrier. The argument turned into a command. Back in the present, neighbors watch from behind frosted windows. A car passes slowly down the street, headlights sweeping across the porch, highlighting the woman's outline. She stands there for a long breath. Her body shakes not just from cold but from the sudden exposure to humiliation and fear. Her phone is inside the house on the kitchen table. She had left it there in the rush and the shock. She has no shoes. She has no coat. She has only the nightgown and the memory of the last 2 minutes. The narrator zooms out slightly and introduces the setting's small but important details. The house lights, the neighbor's hush, the distant sound of a dog barking. Everything feels ordinary, which makes the cruelty feel like an ugly surprise. The contrast builds tension. If this was a quiet neighborhood where people left their doors unlocked, why would someone be cast out like trash? That thought grips the audience and pulls them forward. Suddenly, a soft sound from next door breaks the pattern. An elderly neighbor opens their door and steps onto their porch. The light from their doorway is warm, the color of old blankets and hot soup. The neighbor's face is lined with years but kind. They wrap their hands around a mug, steam curling up. The camera captures a single line of dialogue from the neighbor, spoken out loud but without revealing motives. "Stay with me." That line is small but powerful. It turns the scene from pure despair into a question of human meaning. Why would an elderly neighbor risk stepping into this moment? What did they see through the window that made them act? The narrator pauses just long enough for the audience to feel the weight of the next beat. The first part closes on the woman lowering her shoulders as if hearing a lifeline. The porch light glints on the wet fabric of her nightgown. The lock behind her is still firmly shut. The screen fades to a close-up of the neighbor's hands, which reach out in a gentle, steady movement. The narrator's voice drops to a softer tone. Something small, a single word or action, can change everything that follows. That promise is the suspense hook. Viewers want to know what the neighbor will do, and how this small act will change the night, and perhaps the lives involved. End of part 1. Viewers are left with the image of a woman in the cold and the neighbor's warm light, wondering who will choose compassion and what consequences will follow. The elderly neighbor quietly stepped off their porch, moving slowly but with surprising purpose, as if they had already decided that they would not let the young woman face the cold alone. Their coat was thick, the kind worn by people who understood winter well. Snow gathered on the shoulders, but they didn't seem to notice. Their warm porch light spread across the walkway and touched the edge of the young woman's bare feet. She blinked through the cold and looked up. The neighbor's eyes were soft, steady, and filled with something she had been missing all evening: simple human kindness. The neighbor spoke in a calm voice, careful not to startle her. "Come inside for a moment. You don't have to stand out here." The words felt like a blanket. She hesitated, glancing back at the closed door of her home. The lock stared at her, unmoving, like a reminder of a life that had suddenly frozen. She wasn't sure if she should leave the porch or stay. Maybe her husband would open the door again. Maybe he would realize he had gone too far. But the house stayed silent. But wind gust pushed against her legs and made her step back, her arms wrapped tightly around her body. The neighbor saw her hesitation and took one gentle step forward. "You can warm up at my place until things calm down," they said softly. The young woman finally nodded, not because she was ready, but because the cold had become too sharp to fight. She took one step toward the neighbor's porch, then another. Snow stung her bare feet, making each step feel like a small battle. The neighbor noticed and immediately slipped off their own scarf, wrapping it around her shoulders without a second thought. It smelled faintly of laundry soap and chamomile tea. As they slowly walked toward the neighbor's home, A soft thud sounded from behind the door of her house, shifting slightly. She turned. The neighbor did too, but no one came out. It was just the wind pushing against the frame. The hope she felt for a second faded again. Inside the neighbor's home, warmth wrapped around her instantly. The air smelled like ginger biscuits and warm wood. A small lamp glowed in the corner, casting soft shadows around the room. The neighbor guided her to sit on a cushioned chair near a heater. "Let me get you a blanket," they murmured as she sat down. The warmth almost hurt at first. Her fingers tingled. Her toes burned, but slowly, her body began to breathe again. The neighbor returned with a thick blanket and draped it over her shoulders. "There you go. Take your time. You're safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign, like she hadn't heard it directed at her in a long time. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "I didn't expect him to do that." The sentence came out small, like a fragile confession. The neighbor nodded slowly, not prying. "Sometimes people lose control," they said carefully. "But no one should be left out in the cold like that." Their tone held no anger, just a quiet understanding. She wiped her face with trembling fingers. The neighbor handed her a warm cup of tea. The steam rose gently, fogging her vision for a second. She held the cup with both hands and felt life returning to her fingertips. After a long silence, the neighbor spoke again. "You don't have to go back right now. Rest here for a while." She looked at the neighbor, their lined face, their gentle expression, the steadiness in their voice. And for the first time that night, she felt a small spark of peace inside her chest. The narrator's voice comes in softly. In the darkest moments, even the smallest act of kindness can shift a person's world. The camera closes on the young woman's face, no longer frozen, but not yet healed, just suspended between hurt and hope. This ends part 2, leaving viewers wondering what will happen when morning comes and whether her husband will regret what he did, or double down. The young woman stayed inside the neighbor's small living room while the night wrapped the street in silence. The room felt safe and ordinary. A worn sofa, a small bookshelf, photographs of family gatherings, and a kettle that clicked softly on the stove. The neighbor moved with calm, small motions, refilling the cup, folding a spare blanket, checking the window shades. Everything the neighbor did was steady, like an attempt to stitch a small hole in a frightened heart. She sat with the blanket pulled up to her chin, the warm tea cupped in both hands. The heat chased away the chill from her feet and from the edges of her mind. She watched the steam rise and thought about the closed door at her house. The final click of the lock had replayed itself like a cruel echo. The whole evening moved in pieces in her head. The argument, the shout, the slam. It felt strange to be cared for by a stranger, and strangely comforting at the same time. The neighbor did not press for details. They knew there was a time for asking and a time for listening. For now, they offered quiet company. Once in a while, they glanced at her to make sure she was breathing, that she was warming up. They spoke softly about simple things, the weather, a neighbor's cat that liked to nap on the porch, a recipe for a simple soup. These small, ordinary topics helped anchor her. They were little anchors in a wild sea. After a while, she gathered the courage to speak. Her voice was small, but steady. "I didn't think he would actually send me out," she said. The words spilled out more easily than she expected. The neighbor listened without interrupting, and when she finished, they said, "You did the right thing by coming here. Nobody should be left alone like that." She thought about calling someone, her sister, her mother, but her hands trembled at the thought. If she called, what would she say? "I'm outside in the cold." Would they drop everything and come? Maybe, or maybe they would say things that would make her feel worse. For now, the neighbor's home felt like a small island where she could breathe without deciding anything. The narrator's voice described what her mind did next. It folded through memories and fears. She remembered how the relationship had begun, with easy laughs and shared afternoons. Small kindnesses had come like warm light. Later, stresses crept in, money worries, long work hours, nights when both were too tired to notice each other's needs. The fight that evening had been one of those nights when little things exploded into a larger hurt. But now, sitting safe, she also felt the sting of shame. Pride kept whispering that she should not have let herself be pushed out like that. She felt foolish for not packing a bag before the argument could flare. She felt unprepared. The neighbor watched this small grief and, without dramatic words, handed her a notepad and a pen. "Write down what you need to do in the morning," they suggested. Simple steps help. It was practical advice, the kind that helps when emotions cloud everything. She wrote a few shaky bullets: find warm clothes, call a family member, check on important documents. The neighbor offered to make a list of local shelters and helplines. Though she hesitated, she was not sure she wanted to involve anyone yet. Still, the list was there, a quiet map for when the storm passed. Outside, occasional cars rolled by and left thin trails of light. Once, a shadow crossed the neighbor's curtained window, a person passing on the sidewalk. For an instant, she felt the old fear rise again, the idea that everyone knew what had happened and watched with judgment. The neighbor noticed and closed the curtains without a word. Time moved slowly. She sipped her tea and felt small comforts rebuild her center. The neighbor fixed a small snack and set it on the table. "You need energy," they said simply. She ate, not because she was hungry, but because eating felt like reclaiming herself. At one point, she almost reached for her phone, then stopped. She wanted to wait until morning to make the call that would change things. The neighbor respected that. Rest now, they advised. Decide tomorrow. The camera lingers on her face, exhausted, raw, and beginning to breathe again. The part ends with the house clock ticking and the neighbor folding a blanket at her feet. A small human gesture that means, "You are not alone tonight." Morning arrived quietly, slipping through the neighbor's curtains in soft, pale stripes. The world outside was still cold, but the harsh bite of night had eased. Snow on the rooftops gleamed under the early light, and the air felt strangely calm, the kind of calm that comes after an emotional storm. Inside the neighbor's home, the young woman slowly opened her eyes. She had fallen asleep on the sofa with the blanket wrapped around her like a cocoon. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The gentle smell of tea and the creak of the neighbor's wooden floor brought everything back. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. Her nightgown felt wrinkled and cold against her skin, but the warmth of the room made it bearable. The neighbor stepped in quietly, carrying a small tray with warm bread and honey. "Good morning," they said kindly. "You slept well?" She nodded, though her eyes carried the weight of a long night. "Thank you for everything," she said softly. The neighbor simply gave a small smile and placed the tray on the coffee table. "Eat a little before you make any big decisions. Morning thoughts are clearer than midnight ones." The narrator's voice explains that morning can be both comforting and frightening. Comforting because daylight brings clarity. Frightening because daylight also brings reality, decisions, consequences, and truths that can't be hidden in the dark. The young woman looked toward the window. Her house, just a short distance away, stood silent. The porch where she had been thrown out still held faint footprints in the snow. The memory froze her, but she also felt a small shift inside, a soft strength rising. The neighbor sat in a nearby chair, giving her space but staying close in case she needed support. "You don't have to rush," they said, "but the earlier you face things, the easier it becomes." She knew the neighbor was right, even if her heart wasn't ready. Slowly, she took a piece of warm bread and let the sweetness ground her. She whispered, "I don't know what he'll say if I go back." The neighbor didn't respond with judgment. Instead, they asked calmly, "Do you want to go back?" The question hung in the air. She looked down at her hands. The honest answer was complicated. Part of her wanted to knock on the door and hope for an apology. Another part of her felt deep hurt and fear, the kind that didn't disappear in a single night. "I don't know," she admitted. "Then maybe," the neighbor said gently. "The first step is just collecting your things. You can decide the rest afterward." That small suggestion felt manageable. It didn't force her into forgiveness, or confrontation, or leaving permanently. It was simply a practical step, something she could control. She nodded slowly. "I think I need my phone and my bag." The neighbor stood, offering a supportive smile. "I'll walk with you." They handed her a spare coat and a pair of warm socks. She slipped them on, and for the first time since last night, she felt a bit protected from the cold outside and the cold memories pressing in as they stepped outside. The morning air greeted them with a crisp, biting freshness. Snow crunched under their feet. The street was quiet, only a few early risers clearing their sidewalks. When they reached her house, she paused at the bottom of the steps. The porch looked different in daylight, less frightening, but still full of heavy emotions. The neighbor stood beside her, not pushing, simply letting her choose the moment. She took a long breath and knocked gently on the door. No answer. She knocked again, firmer, this time, still nothing. Her heart pressed harder against her ribs. The neighbor placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, you're not alone." She finally reached for the doorknob. It turned easily, unlocked. She glanced at the neighbor, confusion filling her face. The door eased open with a slow creak. What she found inside surprised her enough that she froze in place. The living room was not how she left it. Something was off, something unexpected, and the moment she stepped inside, she realized the morning was going to bring answers she wasn't prepared for. The door swung open with a soft groan, lifting dust from the floor as if the house itself was waking from a long sleep. The young woman stepped inside cautiously, the neighbor staying just behind her like a quiet shield. Morning light slipped through the curtains, cutting soft lines across the floor and illuminating the stillness of the room. What struck her first was the silence, not the heavy, angry silence from the night before, but a strange, empty one. The air felt different, like someone had been here and left in a hurry. She took a few careful steps, her borrowed socks brushing over the carpet. Her eyes moved across the living room, expecting the mess from last night's argument, the scattered cushions, the misplaced shoes, the coat thrown over a chair. But everything was neat, almost too neat. The cushions were arranged. The coat rack was empty. The floor had been cleared. It felt like stepping into a stage set rather than her own home. The neighbor watched her expression shift from cautious curiosity to quiet confusion. "Take your time," they whispered. She walked toward the kitchen. The coffee mug her husband used every morning was gone. The dish she left in the sink had been washed and placed on a towel to dry. The trash bin was empty. Something inside her tightened. Her phone was on the counter, right where she had left it, except now it was charging, neatly placed beside the outlet. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. The battery light blinked full dot, and then she noticed the note. A small slip of paper sat beside the charger. Her heartbeat quickened as she reached for it. The handwriting was her husband's familiar but hurried. The neighbor stayed silent as she unfolded it. "I'm sorry for losing my temper. I needed some time alone. I'll be staying with a friend for a while. Please take care of yourself." No explanations. No question of whether she needed anything. No mention of last night. Just a quiet retreat. She stared at the short message. Her mind moved in several directions at once. Relief, frustration, confusion, loneliness. The note was both an apology and an escape. It acknowledged the fight but didn't face it. It offered space but not closure. The neighbor touched her elbow gently. "How do you feel?" She exhaled slowly, shakily. "I don't know. Everything feels strange." Her attention shifted to the hallway. She walked to the bedroom, her steps slow. When she opened the door, the room greeted her with the same unnerving neatness. The bed was made. Her husband's duffel bag was missing. His winter boots were gone. Only her things remained. Folded shirts, a drawer slightly open where she had left it earlier in the day. She sat on the edge of the bed, letting the blanket fall from her shoulders. The house that felt like a trap last night felt hollow now, like someone had removed the noise but left the echo. The neighbor sat quietly on a chair near the door, giving her space but staying close enough to support her. After a long pause, she said, "I don't know what happens now." The neighbor smiled gently. "You don't have to know everything today. Just think about what you need for the next few hours. One small step at a time." She nodded. The advice was simple, but it helped. She breathed in, steadier now. Then her phone buzzed suddenly in her hand. The sound made her flinch. A message flashed on the screen, not from her husband, but from a family member she hadn't spoken to in a long time. The preview read, "Hey, is everything okay? I heard something." She looked at the screen, confused and worried. How did they know anything? The narrator's voice comes in softly. "Sometimes the truth reaches people before we are ready for it." Part 5 closes with her staring at the message. The neighbor, watching with quiet concern, in the audience wondering what rumor or news has already spread, and what it will mean for her next decision. The days after the court hearing felt strangely quiet for her. For so long, her life had been filled with shouting, doors slamming, and the constant fear of doing something wrong. Now there was peace, an unfamiliar peace that took time to get used to. She stayed with her parents after the judge granted her protection, and for the first time in years, she could sleep without waking up in panic. Her family kept checking on her, making sure she had eaten, making sure she had rested. They didn't ask too many questions. They simply stayed close, and that alone gave her strength she hadn't known she still had. One morning, her mother placed a warm cup of tea beside her and said softly, "You don't have to rush anything. Just breathe, one day at a time." She nodded, wrapping her hands around the cup, letting the warmth sink into her chest. A few days later, the neighbor Mr. Rafiq came by to see how she was doing. The same man who pulled a blanket around her that night. The same man who called her parents when she stood trembling outside his door at midnight. "Just wanted to make sure you're all right," he said gently. She thanked him again, even though she had thanked him a dozen times already. He waved it off. "Anyone would have done it," he said, but she knew not everyone would have. Not everyone would open the door in the middle of the night. Not everyone would have acted quickly enough to protect her. She would never forget that dot. As days passed, she began journaling, something her therapist suggested. The first few entries were messy and emotional, but slowly she started writing about more than fear. She wrote about what she wanted, her hopes, her dreams, her plans. She wasn't sure yet where her life was heading, but at least now she was the one in control. Her therapist also helped her understand something important. What she survived wasn't because she was weak. It happened because she stayed too loyal to someone who never respected her. And leaving, that was strength, not failure. One afternoon, her father asked if she wanted to take a short trip out of the city just to get fresh air. She agreed. They drove to a quiet viewpoint overlooking a river, a place she loved as a child. She stood there, watching the water move steadily, never stopping, never pausing, always flowing forward. It reminded her of life. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I spent years thinking things would magically get better, but the moment I left, everything finally started to change." Her father placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes," he said, "we stay too long in storms that were never meant for us. Getting out is the hard part, but you did it." That evening, back home, she opened her journal again and wrote a sentence she never thought she would. "I survived. And now, I'm rebuilding." The message from the police came a week later. They informed her that her husband had completed the first required counseling session and that he was under strict monitoring. She felt a knot in her stomach, but also a sense of distance, as if that chapter was already fading in the background. She didn't wish him harm. She only wanted safety and a chance to live without fear. One night, as she sat with her family watching the sunset from the balcony, Her mother said softly, "This is your second chance. Don't be afraid to live it." She smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time in months. She wasn't fully healed. Healing doesn't happen overnight, but she was no longer trapped, no longer silenced, no longer alone. The night she was thrown out in her nightgown felt like a lifetime ago. A painful moment, yes, but also the moment that pushed her toward freedom. The moment that led her back to her family. The moment that showed her courage she didn't know she had. Now, with every sunrise, she reminded herself, life didn't end that night. It started over